CKUW 95.9 FM. My name is Kristen Andrews. I'm so grateful to be the co-host here with community nutritionist
Mary Jane Eason.
And we welcome you. We welcome you to Wooden Spoons, where every Friday morning we discuss topics of healthy living, environmental issues. We try to get to what's going on in our community and all kinds of other interests in this 1 hour show. On Wooden Spoons, we do recognize that all things are related. And it's with learning and awareness that we connect the dots that make up our world and find all of the ingredients for the recipes of life. So we just want to welcome you in this morning. We're going to try to get to some, we've actually got some very relevant, very current issues that we're going to discuss with our guests. We've got two guests waiting with us on the phone lines this morning. So we're going to get that right away. We try to bring you perspectives that aren't found on mainstream media. This is what community radio sounds like. This is what volunteer-driven radio is. Good morning, Mary Jane.
Good morning. Done very well, Kristen.
Oh my gosh, what a whirlwind week we've had.
Oh, it was
the garden party.
Yes.
Can I just say how wonderful the garden party was?
Well, it was, it was wonderful. Thank you to the creator. I have to say this right now because we got the day.
We were fully supported by nature.
Yes.
What a perfect day.
Yes.
Both for the big general strike parade, for the Doors Open events, but most importantly for Mary Jane's 10th anniversary garden party, which was a roaring success.
Well, you're putting it in very, you're being very generous in your whatever you're saying. But
I saw all the tables filled.
That's true.
I saw all the vendors having people standing at their tables. I saw the volume of food that went out that people enjoyed and ate on site and then packed up to-go containers to take home with them. I enjoyed some of that take-home food in the days following the garden party, and I was so grateful. I'm a huge fan of the polenta, and so is my mom now. She just enjoyed that tremendously.
Did you have the polenta with the mushrooms?
I had one of all of the polentas.
Okay. Anyway, it was a fantastic day with lots of plants for sale, and it was very heartening to see people coming together from different parts of the city, and also the community. And the children's corner was well attended with the guinea pigs, which were very well taken care of. And
oh my gosh,
and
yes.
It was just, I felt so grateful for being able to have this event, and we've been doing it every year. It's a tremendous amount of work, as you know, and it never seems to end, but we got through that. And it was all very heartening. So thank you, everybody that came to the garden party. Hope to see you next year. Anyway, we have a very intense morning this morning. And we have three guests, actually. So I'm just going to start. I'm going to introduce them. And then we will talk to them very shortly. So in case you haven't heard, the month of May...
And it's
yes.
Okay, it's a number that...
Oh, they're talking back. Go ahead.
Oh, hello. What happened there?
Oh, I thought I could turn on the telco to have the waiting in the background, but they're talking.
Oh,
Please
sorry.
continue. Please continue.
Sorry about that. If you haven't heard yet, the month of May is called Environmental Sensitivities Month, and we are in the last day of May, so it is very appropriate or fortuitous that we are able to talk to three people with environmental sensitivities who will provide different perspectives on the disabling effects of hypersensitivities to environmental triggers. And these effects are physiological, they're metabolic reactions, as well as having emotional and mental components, and they're very distressing. And sociological effects as well, because people with these sensitivities are restricted in where they cannot go and where they can live, and in so many different ways. Estimates of these sensitivities are experienced by, there is varying numbers quoted, but 2.4% and 3% seems to be the percentage of the population that are affected by these sensitivities. So we have three guests today who represent some of the facets of sensitivities, all unable to come to the station because of some form of sensitivity. The first person, Marie LeBlanc. She experiences multiple chemical sensitivities as well as mold and other sensitivities. and unable to work in a regular job because of severe sensitivities to chemicals and molds. And she's now starting to react to wireless devices as well. So she is having a lot of challenges in her life. She has been to Nova Scotia and I imagine I think it's to a doctor in Nova Scotia, and she has seen a specialist in Alberta. We also have Marg Friesen, and Marg has a Master's of Science degree and is a retired research biologist with the federal government. Margaret was on disability leave for 3 years before returning to work with accommodation for electromagnetic hypersensitivity symptoms. She's co-founder of Chemical Sensitivities Manitoba in 1998 and of the Environmental Health Association of Manitoba in 2012. Marg is a scientific advisor to Canadians for Safe Technology, and CAST for short, specializing in the scientific evidence on health effects of wireless radiation. And thirdly, we have Murray Cunningham of the Environmental Health Association, and he will also speak about his own chemical sensitivities. And Murray has worked for 25 years in administration for a Winnipeg School Division. He was diagnosed with multiple chemical sensitivity in 2005, and he worked until 2011 with accommodation, co-founding the environmental, what's the name of that again? I'm just jumping here. Anyways, he formed this organization in 2012, and he now lives on an organic farm in a straw bale house off the grid in southern Manitoba. And he's the founder of the Environmental Health Association. That's EHA Manitoba. Welcome to In Spoons. Marie, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
And Marg?
Yes, I'm here.
And Marie?
Oh, I'm here too.
Okay, it was good to hear all of you.
Good morning, everyone. Glad we've got a good connection here.
And so this is a very huge subject. So we're going to get onto it right away. And I just have to find my.
You'll be happy to know here at the station we have a combination of analog and good old-fashioned technology and hardware that's able to connect us all through the wonderful telco machines. So thank goodness we still have the good old landlines to dial out and reach out to each other with.
Yes, so okay, getting to some of the things that we like to talk about. There's so many facets here. So I would like to ask each of you to explain the symptoms that you experience when exposed to triggers that you encounter in the environment. And, maybe you can tell us how your sensitivity started, what were the triggers, and how these sensitivities have affected your lifestyles. And can we start with Marie?
Okay. Well, my sensitivity started probably most likely around birth. We're not really sure. I keep finding out more and more. And later on in my life, I had mold exposure throughout my life, and then I was bitten by a tick, and then further mold exposure, and I've had so many surgeries. So it just keeps on going on and on. More exposures, and my condition just seems to be worsening. My triggers are pretty much most things in the environment, especially scent. That's a huge factor for me. Mold, building materials, and now it's starting to be like the cell towers, including my cell phone, which kind of makes it quite a challenge. Building materials, pets, new clothes, certain foods, pretty much everything. I have adverse reactions to so many things. Recently I had acute kidney failure from being in mold, and I chose not to go to the hospital because I knew it was my environment, and within 4 days of leaving the environment, my kidney counts I'm not sure it's called kidney counts, but it went back to normal. So I could just imagine what would have happened if I would have stayed in the environment and did go and get care. and they've affected my life so much that I cannot find employment. I've tried to find jobs, but I had to leave because of the pain. There's so much pain in related. There's headaches. There's bladder pain. There's sinuses. Like you name it, it can affect pretty much any organ in my body. I've had over 15, 20 surgeries, and it's affected every aspect of my life. Finding adequate housing, searching out adequate medical, going into public spaces, feeling the isolation and the judgment from family and friends and the disbelief, and always being in explanation mode because I always have to explain everything. Because one day it looks like I'm fine, the next day it looks like I'm not. So it's just affected all avenues. It's kind of put me into isolation, sort of like the polar bear is in isolation. How do you get back into society?
Yes, and just one quick question. You mentioned scents were one of the big triggers. What about scents of flowers that grow in nature? Do those kinds of scents bother you, or is it just chemical scents?
Yeah, pollen. Yeah, that bothers me a lot too. Really, every day I have to pick and choose. Which one am I going to choose?
Yeah. So how are you feeling this morning?
It's kind of half and half. I'll see how I get on this interview.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marie. And maybe you want us to speak next. Who's next? Is it Marg?
Well, it can be Murray.
Okay, Murray, jump right in.
Right. The way I would describe my symptoms changed. In 2005, I got the diagnosis of chemical sensitivity, and how I would have described my symptoms then is not how I would describe them now, because they've changed, now that I understand how chemical sensitivity works. As for when they started, I don't know. But as I approached 50, I had any number of medical problems and was seeing specialists, but every test came back normal. I began to research it and tracked it down to chemical sensitivity. So the symptoms, and Marie described it perfectly, it's every organ system in your body. So you have problems with your eyes, you have problems with your bowels, you have problems with your muscles. Which one you decide to tell a doctor about, they'll get you a consult to that specialty. And you go round and round and round without resolving anything. There's no single test for chemical sensitivity, but you have all of these myriad number of symptoms. And the symptoms, well, I would like to say are not important. It's the whole constellation of symptoms that gives you the idea that it's chemical sensitivity. I will give you the most disturbing one at the time, and still is, and that is a loss of cognitive function. I worked for a school division as an administrator, and sometimes I would have trouble with the English language. I would have trouble with compound sentences. I couldn't understand them. Yet at other times, I could write reams of reports and papers and whatever. And going from that ability to that disability is most disconcerting. I'm much better now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And Marg.
All right. So I have had chemical sensitivities for many years, started probably in my teens, but I was always able to cope with it in one way or another. So, again, a lot of it was cognitive function, and I used to get very, very bad sore throats. Now, so I was able to function. I was able to get accommodation in the workplace in an informal way. It was never formalized, but, I worked in a chemistry lab and was able to manage quite well. But in 1998, so we're talking just over 20 years ago, I started reacting when I was around a computer. And I noticed that when I was by the computer, I would get tingly feelings in the tip of my fingers and on the tip of my tongue. And when I would go away, they would go away, and then when I go back, they'd then start up again. So fortunately for me, I made that connection. And in the span of 2 weeks, I went from very mild symptoms to very severe symptoms, so that when I was close to the computer or anything electrical, and we can include in that some of the ordinary appliances we have in our homes, I would get groggy feeling, so I would lose. I wouldn't be able to. I would have trouble concentrating, and I'd also start to get some symptoms in my heart. So within a span of 2 weeks, I was unable to go to work, and from there, I went to my doctor, of course, and she sent me to the Health Sciences Center, where I saw the director of Occupational and Environmental Health. I'm not sure I've got that quite right, but I saw a specialist, or the specialist, as one would call it, in the province at that time. And it was interesting because I told her my symptoms, and she said, well, that's really interesting, she said, because she'd just been back from a conference, and they were talking about how common chemical sensitivities are in North America, whereas in Europe, they have people with electrical sensitivities, and here you are. This seems to be what you have. So there's a long story there where I was not able to get a diagnosis, per se, that would be recognized by my disability company, which I needed to have to be able to get accommodation at work. And so I ended up going to the U.S. and had some objective testing done, and I also ended up going to the hospital, a special clinic in Toronto, which I can talk about later. So here we are today. I got 3 years on disability, and eventually was able to return to work with accommodation. I worked for 6 years later, and then I retired after over 30 years with the federal government.
Thank you so much for that. Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is Wooden Spoons, and you're listening to CKUW 95.9 FM in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And we're speaking this morning with three guests remotely who are, it's such a huge topic to try to cover, the idea of environmental sensitivities and now the introduction of all the, the wired networks and the new 5G networks they're talking about. So we're going to be touching on all of these topics with these three unique perspectives. So thank you for tuning in this morning. We have just over a half hour left before Democracy Now! So to our guests.
Yeah, we're talking to Marie LeBlanc, Marg Friesen, and Murray Cunningham. Murray and Marg, you both mentioned accommodation. What does that mean, accommodation at work?
In my case, it was a modern office building with some automotive repairs in it and things like that, and I needed to be kept away from chemicals. But the entire environment of the building, air quality, was suspect. So my accommodation was that I had an office on an outside door, so I didn't have to come through the building. I didn't have to deal with the photocopy machine or the exhaust fumes. There was also an understanding that when certain cleaning products were used, that I could leave, just walk away. I still had to get my work done, and I did, but not when there was painting going on or cleaning fluids and things. That's the short answer.
Okay. That's
And
it.
sorry.
And Marg?
All right. So for me, if I have a certain distance from devices, electrical devices, I can tolerate them. So when I returned to work, I could no longer do my previous job, which was mostly in the lab. I worked in DNA methodology, working on population genetics of Arctic marine mammals. And there was a lot of use of chemicals and also some high voltage equipment, which of course was well grounded. It was a safe place for most other people. So I was transferred to a different job. I was transferred to an office where I was not surrounded by electrical devices. A monitor, which was a low EMF, electromagnetic fields monitor, was purchased for me, and I was able to have a mouse with a long extension cord, and I would use the monitor with the image made bigger which anybody can do on their computer, so that I could see it from a distance. And I also was allowed to have flexible work hours, which was really important. So I would, it would be more task-oriented than saying, okay, you have to come in at 8:15 and leave at 4:15. So I was able to adjust my hours so that I could get the work done that I needed to get done. I was very, very fortunate in having such an understanding workplace.
Yes, and that would make a difference in your adjustments too, as opposed to somebody that had no accommodations at all. And there are a lot of controversies surrounding chemical sensitivities and a lot of names given to the condition. It's called environmental illness, sick building syndrome, idiopathic environmental intolerance, or multiple chemical sensitivities. And there is no formal recognition by the main Canadian medical establishment, and I know you've all had contact with the medical profession. So do you want to tell us, Marie and Marg and Murray, you already did to some extent, but how was your experience when you tried to get assistance, medical assistance, and was any of that assistance helpful?
This is Marie.
Yes.
So some of my experience, it's been a challenge because I come in with so many symptoms, and the doctor wants to send me to, every specialist. So I've had sometimes 4 or 5 specialists in a day, and people were always saying, well, I'm a hypochondriac. Well, no, I'm not. I have these challenges. And after a while, I couldn't even enter to go to the appointment. And then the doctors, sometimes I'll go in there, and they want the peer-reviewed document. So I'll give them some, and they say, well, we don't want that one. We want it from, another place. And then they can't bill anything because there's no billing fee code. So what we do, then they put, there's something else that we're put under when we go into a doctor's office. I don't know how to explain that. Marg or Marie might be able to explain that better. And then sometimes they'll say, like if I say I can't take the medications, it's like, well, we're connected to a pharmacy. Like, I know. And it's been a challenge because I also, accessing the actual clinic is a challenge because they're sent. There's a lot of doctors that they want to help so bad. It's just that they're not adequately trained to help us, but they're so good. Some of the doctors are so good, and I've had to go out of province to receive treatment, and it's been quite a challenge. More often than not, they want to send me to a psychiatrist, and unfortunately for me, my supporting doctor was my psychiatrist who sent me out of province for environmental sensitivities, multiple chemical sensitivity, and mold exposure.
Okay. And Marg?
Well, I found that by and large, the medical profession was quite understanding. I think I was very fortunate in the doctors that I saw here, and there were some exceptions, by the way. There were some very notable exceptions, and I was certainly very fortunate that there were some doctors that I did not see.
Okay.
Now, but the disability company that with my disability company, they would not recognize the support that I got from the doctors here. It was not sufficient, so I ended up going down to the States as a specialized clinic down in Dallas, Texas, and I had a brain scan done, and I had another objective test done, which showed that there were abnormalities. So I came back to Canada with that, and that still wasn't good enough. So I needed to have more medical documentation. So we drove, because at that point I couldn't fly, we drove to Toronto to Women's College Hospital, and I had an interview there, and the doctor there said, yes, this woman needs accommodation. I was also accommodated for electrical, chemical, and for fatigue. So there were multiple symptoms as well. So as it turns out, that wasn't good enough. So I was sent, courtesy of the disability company, again to a psychiatrist. So I had a psychiatric assessment, and he also supported my claim. And that wasn't good enough. So then they sent me to a psychologist, and I spent about 5 hours with a psychologist. And he also supported my claim. so then that's what got the whole thing going. So there were supportive people along the way. Fortunately for me, I was well enough at that point to be able to persevere and go through all of these questions and things of that sort. The one thing that we don't have, what we don't have here in Manitoba is we don't really have the expertise. We have the specialists in this area, people who have these conditions, are often sent to allergists. And allergists really don't have the training for this type of thing. And we don't have the people who have this expertise in the environmental aspects. And the other thing we don't have is we don't have treatment. So I think we still have a long way to go. We have clinics that are in Ontario, Nova Scotia, and BC, which have a team of doctors who will see a patient, so you're not running around from person to person, from doctor to doctor, and we're waiting for reports to go from one doctor to another. I want to point out one really, really important thing, and that is that this is a spectrum. And so what we have is we have people who've got very mild symptoms who may or may not need accommodation. A lot of people go, "Oh, I know my perfume or makes me sick, so I'm going to stop wearing it, or my cologne makes me sick," and that's good enough for them. And then we have people who are like Marie, and Marie's certainly not the only one. We've come across many, many people that severe, and who really are very desperate to find somewhere that they can even live. And then there are people in between, like Murray and me. And fortunately for Murray and me, we had the resources and the support to be able to get medical attention soon enough that we didn't that we didn't get to the point where we had nowhere else to go. So that's where the fortunate part is. So people need to realize that chemical and electrical, these are things that are on a spectrum.
That's a very good point. And Murray, your comment?
Yeah, I'll do it in two parts. As for medical services being supportive, I had a lifelong friend who was a doctor. Danced with his wife at their... I had a 20-year history with him, and he'd sent me for several consults, and I asked him chemical sensitivity, and he said he couldn't do it. He said that would be like sending you for a consult for beriberi, which does not exist in Manitoba. And he eventually...
Beriberi, a disease of vitamin deficiency.
Tropical disease
right.
In Tahiti.
Yeah.
Forgive us, Murray, we're having a little bit of an issue with your phone line. Maybe you could just hold a receiver very still, because your line is breaking up a little bit with us.
Okay. You started out with some names for chemical sensitivity. There are probably 20 names for the condition. I like environmental sensitivities.
Yeah.
In the USA, the Medical Association does not recognize it as an illness. In the USA, medical practice is closely associated with the pharmaceutical industry. In other countries throughout Europe, Australia, Russia, it is recognized and to some extent treated. The word you had used was illness, environmental illness. A person who has no legs is not considered ill. They are considered to have a disability. And that's the position in Canada. Environmental sensitivities is a disability recognized by the Canadian Human Rights Commission. Illness, a disability. I'm done.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Yes, so we will continue this, and then at some point we're going to have a break with a song, but maybe we'll just continue for a little bit.
We do have several songs lined up. Perhaps while we just see if we can work the issue out with the breaking up of the phone line, we'll hear one of the songs that you've chosen this morning, just so we can all just take a moment and absorb all that we've been talking about this morning. So. Now you sent in some artists who you all seem to know. These are part of a support system of people who are aware of these issues and exploring these issues. Do you want to say a little bit about the first song that you've chosen?
Oh, right. What's the title? Is it the one by Una McQuat?
No, I think that was the last one you sent in. I think you sent in a pair of songs from one artist, so I was going to play one of those songs.
Oh, is that the one from Bruce Hughes?
Yes.
Elmore? Oh, well, which one are you playing?
The very first one that you'd sent?
Was that The End of Nowhere?
I believe that's the one, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, that's the one I use on my Who Says We Need Fresh Air art projection. He is very supportive of what I'm doing, and the words in the song are, I don't even know how to explain it. They really capture what is happening with people with multiple chemical sensitivities in a way like when it says at the end of my rope. That is so true. And it fits in so well with my Who Says We Need Fresh Air art projection, and he is very supportive, and I'm so happy that him and Elmore allowed me to use their song.
Okay, well, you're listening to CKUW 95.9 FM here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This is Wooden Spoons, and we're about to hear a song called End of Nowhere.
End of the road.
And while the song is called End of Nowhere, you've landed somewhere. You've landed at Wooden Spoons here on CKUW 95.9 FM. So that little song selection was just giving us a little bit of insight into what it might be like to live with in environmental awareness, such as the types that we're talking about this morning.
It's very overwhelming. Marie, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. We just saw the light go off there. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to jump to talking about electromagnetic sensitivities, because that's a very important part of this, and we'll see how far we can get. But just one more question. Because of the lack of understanding that every one of you have faced by the medical profession, and this presents a lot of challenges for people with sensitivities, and this whole concept prevents a challenge to the medical profession and to scientists, I guess, because multiple chemical sensitivities does not fit into the toxicological model that understands toxins to be related to dose response. And for instance, when things are being put in our food, different additives and so on, to determine if they are safe. Let's say aspartame and all these other chemicals. What they do, they test animals, and they give them huge amounts of that particular substance, a huge amount, until they see effects, side effects like tumors and lesions or whatever, harmful effects that affect the animals. So then they work their way downward and come to some kind of a mathematical number that will say, well, at this high level, it's toxic, it can cause cancer. And so the safe dosage would be such and such. And so then they allow things to be put into our food. But chemical sensitivities doesn't fit into that, because a lot of people with these sensitivities are sensitive at very low sensitivity, low doses. In fact, things that are invisible, undetected by most people, you are sensitive to. So do you want to comment on that whole issue?
Okay. For me, it's cumulative. For some people, it could be one event, and they have multiple chemical sensitivity or environmental sensitivities. For me, it was cumulative, so it's hard to measure that. And then, like right now, I can start a day where it maybe not be so bad, and then farther down the day, it's like everything's just hitting me. It's like my barrel is full. Like when I went to Nova Scotia, there they started talking about how your barrel is full. I didn't understand that. It was overflowing. Well, no wonder I couldn't be near anything. So for me, it's like the barrel is full. I look normal. I can talk to other people. Except when I'm having a reaction, I'm having a hard time getting out the words. And someone will say, "Well, you're fine. What happened? Are you drinking?" No. So it's really challenging. Like my barrel is overloading and past full at this point. So pretty much I react to almost everything. I try to function throughout the day and try to be as cognitive as possible. However, people, it's hard for them to understand. I think Marg and Murray can probably explain this one really good. For me, it's a build-up throughout the day. Then sometimes it might take me 2 or 3 days to feel a little bit better. Or one day I'll go into a place, and the next day I just can't do it. And someone says, well, why didn't you go? Why can't you go when you went in the other day? And it's always hard to keep explaining, and sometimes I just don't want to say something, and a lot of people are saying, well, I thought this bothered you. So it's really a challenge, and that just toxic overload is to the max.
Okay.
And it's hard to measure.
Okay, Marg?
All right, well, I'm going to take this approach to more of a toxicological approach. So the traditional thought is that dose makes the poison. That's what you're talking about. So a high dose may be toxic, and a low dose not, is the sort of the traditional concept of that. Now, in recent years, and we've learned this from the endocrine disruptors, that the response is not necessarily linear. It can be nonlinear, and it's actually called a non-monotonic dose response. So we can see effects at low levels that we do not necessarily see at higher levels or doses. And then, of course, we get complicated because we can have different compounds that interact. But one example that maybe a lot of people could relate to is bisphenol A, BPA, which is found in plastics. And Dr. Laura Vandenberg from Tufts University has studied this quite intensively, and has found what she calls undisputed evidence of low-dose effects. So basically, what happens is the body, if it's high enough, the body can recognize it, but if it gets to a certain level, the body can shut down because it recognizes it as a threat. But at low enough doses, it can sneak in because the body doesn't recognize it as being a threat, and so we can experience things that wouldn't happen at higher doses. Now, this is also the case with electromagnetic fields, and we've got quite a few studies which show nonlinear effects. And one of them is from Dr. Lurchel from University in Germany, where he looked at, it was an animal study, and he found that there were carcinogenic effects from radio frequency electromagnetic fields at greater effects at lower levels of exposure than at higher levels. So we see this with some chemicals, and we also see it with electromagnetic fields.
Yes, and speaking of low dosage, when it comes to hormones, it doesn't matter if you have tons of hormones or things that can fit hormone receptors. It doesn't matter if you have lots of it or little. There are only so many receptors, and once they're filled, it doesn't matter if you have a whole bunch of other things added. So it's
right.
Our Stolen Future is a book that compiles all kinds of research about the hormonal effects of pesticides. And how about you, Murray? Do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, just a little bit. Until the 1970s, number 2 was in widespread use. 70s, they outlawed it.
What was in widespread use?
Red dye number 2 was in widespread use.
Okay.
And they found it to be carcinogenic. At that time, our paints had lead in it, and our gasoline had lead in it. It was universal. For years, the tobacco industry told us that smoking did not cause cancer. X-ray technicians sometimes would wear a lead apron. Now they completely leave the room. As time goes on, we find out much. Ion, tanning beds, thalidomide, DDT, or recently Roundup and BPA. We live in a chemical soup. No one can ever know the interactions between the thousands of chemical compounds now in use. So for me, I like the Lululemon bag advice. Don't use chemicals on your kitchen surfaces because someone will inevitably make a sandwich.
That's a very good point. Now, I would like to just, because the time is running out, and I think we need another interview if you're all game for it at some point. But there's the question of electromagnetic hypersensitivity is one that you're very interested in, Marg. And on May the 15th, there were nationwide rallies in the U.S. to oppose the 5G rollout. And other places in Europe, such as Brussels and parts of Italy and Switzerland, halted the 5G rollout. And the 5G rollout stands for fifth generation technology. So would you explain what that is and why we should be concerned about this?
All right, so the wireless devices that we commonly use, such as cell phones, run on use radio frequencies or frequencies that are in the radio frequency range of electromagnetic spectrum. The lower Gs, so 2, 3, 4, which is what we use for cell phones and Wi-Fi and almost everything else nowadays, runs on a certain frequency. The 5G generation fifth-generation technologies will go up. In order to be able to carry more data, we need to use different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, and those go up into a new area where the wavelengths are much shorter. So what that means is that these wavelengths, like the other ones, will go through walls very easily, but the 5G doesn't. They're very short wavelengths. And there are two things that need to happen to have this implemented. And one is that because these wavelengths don't travel well through walls or vegetation, the antenna need to be very close. So that means that these antennae, they're quite small compared to the big ones that we see on cell towers, will be put right outside our homes and our schools. So we're going to be exposed to very close. We're going to be exposed to this very closely. The other thing is that because they're so small, they don't penetrate as deeply as the others. The others actually go through our bodies. These will actually stop at the skin. So there's some really big concern about what effects it'll have on our skin and what implications there are for cancer. We already have science which indicates that the 2, 3, and 4G can create many adverse effects, including cancer. We had the World Health Organization designate wireless radiation in the radio frequency range as a possible carcinogen in 2011. And now we have newer science, which is human and animal studies, huge $30 million study out of the U.S. showing clear evidence of carcinogenicity in rats by it was by the National Toxicology Program of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. Doesn't get much better than that. So we already know that these lower Gs are probably causing cancer and other effects, and this is just going to add one more layer, which is going to be pervasive. So the scientists are very concerned about what the possible effects could be, and in many places are calling for a halt.
And what is the difference between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation? And one of them creates heat and the other one doesn't. One breaks down bonds. So those are all these different things about these electromagnetic radiations. Okay, so what we're talking about, radio frequency, is non-ionizing. Just above the radio frequency range is the ionizing range, and that includes things like X-rays. We know that causes cancer. I mean, it took a long time, by the way, for that to be recognized as well. But basically what that does is it removes the ions, electrons from it affects the orbit of the ions around atoms. Radio frequency radiation isn't strong enough to do that. Where the heating comes in is the radio frequency actually heats as well. And there's something called Safety Code 6, Health Canada Safety Code 6. And what happens if you have strong enough radio frequency radiation, it heats. So our microwave ovens, for example, are in that range, and that they run at 2.45 gigahertz. By the way, that's the same frequency as Wi-Fi. So basically, and Mike Havas, who's a retired prof out of University of Trent and a specialist in this area, I would encourage everybody to go to her website, basically says, especially in schools, we're very concerned about the effects of this in schools, is that when we have students in a classroom with high Wi-Fi, which in many cases they use industrial strength Wi-Fi, basically what we're doing is we're putting our kids into a microwave oven at low power. So it's not high enough to heat, but it's low enough that the kids are exposed, and of course they're exposed to a lot of other devices as well. And this is something that really hasn't been studied enough, and that is the cumulative effect. So there's the aggregate effect of all of the devices that our kids and staff are exposed to in a school and a classroom, and then there's the aggregate effect of all of these devices, and then the cumulative effect. So if you're exposed to it day after day, and the DNA damage that's done, now it doesn't do direct damage like ionizing radiation, but there are over 30 studies which indicate DNA damage and oxidative stress.
So if you are constantly bombarded with this thing that's breaking down your DNA and you don't have time to recover, then eventually something bad is going to happen. And so, we have many concerns. And so what the 5G is doing is just going to add to that.
There's an article in the Echo Journal, the Echo Network Journal. Do you want to just mention that? That has a lot of information about this electromagnetic radiation.
I would encourage people to have a look at that. It's an article that I just wrote and that was just published in the Manitoba Eco Network Eco Journal. It's called "What is 5G? How could it affect our health and environment?" So we're concerned, it hits many of the high points. Something that it doesn't actually address, which we also need to look at, is that there's some weather scientists who are very concerned about 5G. Now, not only do they want to put antennas outside our homes, so we'll be constantly flooded with this radiation, but also they want to beam it down from space. And so what the weather scientists are concerned about is it interferes because these rays don't penetrate very well, or they run at the same frequency that the weather scientists use to detect weather patterns, and that it'll interfere with that. So we have a lot of different concerns. We've got human health concerns. We've got environment concerns. Now, when it comes to the environment, there are many studies which also show wireless radiation affects animals and plants. And with the 5G, because it only penetrates into the very thin layers, or most intensely, it does go deeper as well, but most intensely, we're very concerned about the insects, and we already know that the pollinator populations are crashing around the world. And what this could do is it could just go into the very thin layer, and there is one study that's been done which has got very big concerns, not only about non-thermal effects, but also thermal effects that could be happening in insects. And, of course, amphibians are another target group that is of concern.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, and I want to thank Marie LeBlanc, Murray Cunningham, and you, Marg Friesen, for bringing awareness to these very important topics. I also want to mention that if anybody, that Marie has a video that she's made. Would you want to just give the name of the video, Marie?
Oh, are you talking about that 1 minute one that you saw?
A 10-minute. It's who says we need fresh air, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
And also, I think you are interested in getting assistance with funding for getting a van so that you can travel and across Canada, letting people know about chemical sensitivities.
Yes, I'd like to go across Canada and promote and project Who Says We Need Fresh Air, which is comments from people from around the world who have this condition, and I project them onto buildings, and I would like to create awareness and go across Canada and have a sponsor and funding. And if people want to contact me, they can go on to marieleblanc.net or email me at whosaysweneedfreshair@gmail.com. And thank you so much for having us on today on the last day of Multiple Chemical Sensitivities Awareness Month, otherwise known as Environmental Sensitivities Awareness Month.
You are very welcome, and I think this has to be explored more, and I would like to be in contact with you, all of you, in some way to find out how it's best to increase awareness about this very, very important issue. And insects, yes, they are declining, and this might be another wave of extinction, and I'm very, very concerned about that. I've noticed the lack of bees this year, in spite of all the dandelions trying to draw them in. As we end Wooden Spoons, we're getting the signal here. We have no time for a recipe this morning.
We have just 1 minute left. We won't actually get to any of our community announcements this morning either. But it is, we're still sitting at single digits outside. It's 8 degrees. We're going to head up to about 18 degrees today. It's going to be another sunny day. I believe that. It was a beautiful day yesterday. So as we go into the weekend, we just want to thank you all. You've been listening to Wooden Spoons, sponsored by Mary Jane's Cooking School on CKUW 95.9 FM. If you didn't catch some of the things, or if you want to re-listen again, because that was a lot of in-depth discussion, you can check the website, ckuw.ca, and look into the archives of Wooden Spoons.